Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. We are here in Senegal at Dakar for the 4th Forum on Peace and Security in Africa. Presidents from Senegal, Macky Sall, from Mali, Ibrahima Boubacar Keïta, and from Rwanda, President Paul Kagame are all here to talk about issues of security in their countries and the region. They talked a lot about the fight against terrorism. Florence Parly, hello.
Hello.
Madam Minister, we've heard a lot about the G5 Sahel in this forum. It seems to be the cornerstone of security in Africa. The first operation just took place. It was Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger heading it up. Do you think that it was successful, and is the G5 Sahel a capital step for security in Africa?
It's a fundamental political initiative, and it is one that will have military consequences. Quite apart from the G5 Sahel initiative, we have decided to create a joint armed force. And that joint armed force has carried out its first operation just a few days ago, an operation that finished yesterday. So the forum in Dakar was also the opportunity for us to talk again about the reasons for which this force is useful, and it is useful more than ever, and also to talk about how collectively we can help in ramping up this force. Today, certain finances have been obtained, but they are not yet sufficient.
Well, the issue of finance is crucial because delegating security to these countries means they have to be able to finance it. But we're talking about some of the poorest countries in the world.
You're absolutely right. These are countries that are in dire need in all sectors, be it security, education, energy. So it is extremely important that this joint force be able to obtain very strong support from a certain number of contributors.
But today we're far from what we need.
Today we are making progress. The European Union is contributing to the amount of 50 million euros. The United States have very recently also fallen in behind the initiative, and I think that's extremely significant. France is supporting this initiative alongside other member states of the European Union. And France truly wishes to find additional financing.
But we were talking about 100 million, and the Africans are asking for 400 million.
We are missing 100 million for the moment to continue scaling up this armed force. We are counting on the very existence of this first operation, which is quite remarkable. When the President of the Republic visited Bamako at the beginning of July for the G5 Sahel summit meeting, that force was still in the blueprint phase. It has been set up extremely quickly. I paid a visit at the end of July to the headquarters in Niamey, the headquarters or the operational center from which this operation has been organized just a few days ago, and it simply wasn't finalized. It was still a construction site, and we have managed to finalize it thanks to the support of Germany. We've managed to stick to our schedule, which is a technical prowess, and it is one that should help us today to facilitate the contribution of a certain number of donors.
Can we understand that we need to bring African countries to take charge of their own security? Does this mean then that the Operation Barkhane that France is heading up in the region, 4,200 men, does this mean that they'll be pulling out? And if so, do you have a timetable?
The Barkhane operation will last as long as it needs to last. And the French armed forces will be there as long as they are needed.
But France is not intended to stay, or that would give off a negative image.
Well, first of all, we are hoping, above everything else, that this fight against terrorism will end one day, because one day we will win this fight. But in the meantime, it is important that France be able to continue to have the support of a certain number of multinational forces. There are some that already exist already, l'ANIMUSMA, the 8th Mali, But as I said earlier, it is absolutely vital that it be the African countries themselves that embrace this issue. We will be there to help the scaling up of the joint armed forces, and that is one of the missions of the Barkhane force, fighting against terrorism, but also contributing to the training of the Malian soldiers, the soldiers who are in the G5 Sahel. We are also training and advising.
As you said, France is fighting terrorism in the Sahel, in Africa, also in the Levant region. We're thinking specifically of Syria and Iraq, with recently 2 major military victories in Raqqa and Mosul. When can we say there's total victory over ISIS? When can we use that term?
I think that all one can say for the moment is that ISIS is going from defeat to defeat. The territories that ISIS occupied, and whereby they wanted to set up a territorial caliphate, well, 90% of those territories today have been freed. And the people who had been expelled from their territories are now coming back. But you're quite right to underline the major victory of Raqqa, because Raqqa is very symbolic for the French. It is from Raqqa that a certain number of the terrorist attacks against France were actually initiated.
Well, that's exactly why. Let me ask the question again. The victory in Raqqa impressed a lot of people, but how can we say, or can we say, that we've beaten ISIS?
The fight against ISIS is not over. It is not over because ISIS is already beginning to redeploy its activities and to change into an underground terrorist organization. We know that we are far from over with the fight against terrorism, and the fight against ISIS might change in shape, but it won't change as far as the violent activities that they do are concerned. France continues to be inherently invested in the coalition.
In Syria and in Iraq.
And France, as well, because of bilateral cooperation, is also giving support in the shape of training the Iraqi army, and that's very important.
Does that mean that we need to be watchful about jihadi transfers to Libya or other countries, even here in Africa, where we are?
This question of the future of the jihadists is one that crops up very often. As I said earlier, there are a certain number of these jihadists who are now underground, and we are extremely attentive to what they are doing, and our intelligence services are playing a major role.
And they're keeping a close watch on the French jihadis as well.
You know, we don't make a difference. This is a war that is being waged against terrorists. We don't ask them for their passports. We simply treat them all the same.
There's also a subject in France we'll be hearing a lot about in 2018. You'll be the honorary minister. It's the military planning law and the defense budget. We've heard a lot about that. So 34.5 billion in 2018. You will have a view on that budget. You'll have some choices to make. You talked about modernization. Is that something that's capital for you?
It's a ministry that has already been profoundly reformed, but it was descaled. This ministry has cut its staff down by 60,000 over the last 10 years. We are now entering into a different phase. This was a very strong decision that was made by the President of the Republic, which is to scale up our armies. First of all, because our armies are confronted with a certain number of threats. They are active on a certain number of international areas. And also because there is a political desire to ensure that our defense represents 2% of GDP between now and 2025. We have made choices that show our resolve to focus on protection. The protection, above all, of the soldiers and of the equipment that they use. Now, what does that actually mean? It means to accelerate the replacement of the bulletproof vests, of the helmets, of the assault weapons, and also to renew the protection, for example, the armor plating of vehicles. In the Sahel, for example, these vehicles are extremely vulnerable given the mines that are regularly to be found.
As you mentioned modernization, one thing when we talk about fighting against terrorism, special forces are stretched a lot in France. So what about modernizing helicopters? That's been requested. Is that a priority for you as well?
We have two priorities. The first is what we call regenerating our forces. That is restoring equipment that has been hardly used. And given the intensity of our forces and where they are deployed, here in the Sahel, for example, and to enable them to prepare for the future, we need to do more. As you know, the Ministry of the Armed Forces is the first French public investor. We invest more than 18 billion euros in military equipment, and all of that has to be programmed in advance. Today, we are taking decisions that, for some of them, will only have a visible impact in 30 or 40 years.
One thing about the French budget, the international operations, in fact, now are under the helm of the Ministry of Defence. There's mention of about 1.5 billion for international operations. That's heavy. That's quite a heavy change for you, isn't it?
It's not a change.
Well, in the past, it was shared across other ministries.
In the past, the Ministry of the Armed Forces contributed considerably to the financing, and every year we wonder exactly what the contribution of the Ministry of the Armed Forces will be to a collective interministerial financing. What I may say is that in 2017, we will be benefiting from interministerial solidarity and will be getting supplementary finance thanks to the rectified finance law. And that's good news.
Thank you very much, Florence Parly, for this interview. Stay with us for more news on France 24.